This episode of ENVERT TV is being brought to you by the Indie Bible. The Indie Bible offers affordable music promotion for artists of all genres. For 20 years, the Indie Bible has helped independent artists with music promotion, getting radio airplay, distribution, radio promotion, and much more. The Indie Bible features the most comprehensive music business directory with over 1,500 pages, organized into 16 sections sorted by genre and geographic location, featuring radio stations, booking agencies, and more. The Indie Bible will help you to gain worldwide exposure across the US, Canada, UK, Europe, Australia, Asia, and everywhere else, all on a limited budget. To grab the latest edition of the Indie Bible, click the link in our description below. Hey, what's up, music lovers, and welcome back to ENVERT TV. I'm your host and editor-in-chief, Flisadam. In this episode, I had a chance to catch up with producer, DJ, and rapper Kotic Couture. During our conversation, they shared Baltimore City's rich history and dance music, whether or not hip-hop is ready to accept a gender-fluid and queer rapper, their breakout song, Pink Durag, their upcoming album, and much more. Check out our full conversation here. Thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with me. I have so many questions for you, just because the way we met was quite unique. So before we get there, because I think that's a fun story, I was absolutely intrigued with the name you chose for your artist name. So I'm sure you probably went over this a million times with other outlets, but could you kind of give me the story and the meaning behind your name as an artist?
Of course. So, as people of a certain age, we live through certain experiences of the internet. So, I was a MySpace kid, and everybody who was a MySpace kid knows like you had to have a really cool MySpace name. So, I was like, oh my God, I need a really cool MySpace name. And at the same time, when I would ride the bus home, there was another kid who rode the bus with me, and we would like freestyle battle. And one day I was just like, I am chaotic. And I was like, how do you spell this word? Like, I don't know how to spell this word. This is like early elementary school. I definitely should have known how to spell chaotic. I was like, okay, I'm gonna just spell it like this. And I made it my MySpace name. And then when I was like, I want a last name, like I want a cool name. And I really loved Remy Ma at the time. And she had a song called Fresh. And in her hook, she was like, I am couture hip hop. And I was like, that's what I'm gonna make. I'm gonna make like genre bending, like couture hip hop. I'm gonna be Chaotic Couture. And I just took the name and ran with it.
I think it's such a poetic name just because the two dual meanings. Like chaotic is supposed to be like constantly in disarray, not much
Mhm.
structure to it. And then couture in the fashion sense is like custom
That's
made,
right.
one of a kind. So like a one of a kind chaotic experience of music. I don't know if I'm like summarizing it for you, but like when I
No, you
heard the
are.
name, when I heard the name, I was like, that's so ingenious. Like I just love the concepts coming together. So speaking of coming together, you come from a really musical city, similar to myself, but not a lot of people credit Baltimore with being innovators in music overall. So like, can you talk about what it was like growing up in Baltimore and like the musical history that the city holds?
Yeah, so I am actually one of the crazy people that Baltimore has adopted. I'm a Baltimore
Mhm.
transplant. I grew up in a very, very, very small rural town in Maryland. And Baltimore and like DC were really close cities, and Philly was a really close city as well. It was just the opposite direction. So I was always drawn to these cities, but it was something about Baltimore. That's the radio stations we listened to. It was Maryland, it was home. And when I just started going out and I started getting into music, I was like, all right, I'm gonna go to Baltimore. And when I got into the club scene here, when we had a lot of like actual clubs, now we work out of a lot of venues, one at clubs like the Paradox. When I went to the Paradox for the first time, it sounds so crazy to say because it is a club, but it was like I never felt so at home. And I instantly knew like Baltimore is the place that I want and need to be. And because we do have such a rich like musical history, it's cool because it's something you can kind of trace back. And I was like, oh my God, I just got so entranced in like music and studying it and figuring it out. And I just fell in love with this city.
That's interesting that you say that because being from New Jersey, Baltimore, and Philly share like a love triangle, if you will, of like
Mm-hmm.
musical sounds. And one thing that I've noticed in the differences between the different cities is the interpretation of it. So our music scene is similar, but there are differences. Like Jersey sounds different from Baltimore, but people from the outside don't really get it. But people that are from the cities and from the states know the difference.
Definitely.
So can you talk to me a bit about how the music scene, as far as like the music community, is in Baltimore? Because it's not that large of a metropolitan city. So could you talk a bit more about like the venues and how you kind of find your community there?
It's very hard, and shout out to Baltimore City. You're probably gonna hear dirt bikes and police sirens through this because it's nice outside, and I hear the dirt bikes coming now. Um, I came up in a time where there is a legendary club called the Paradox, and we used to go there for LGBT nights, and they called them Super Third Saturdays. So the third Saturday every month they would have the queer party, and in that time things were 18 and over, but there weren't any like queer spots 18 and over. So like the elder queer people wanted a place where we could go. So even before we were 18, we were in the Paradox. And then the Paradox closed. And at that time, because this is the scene that I came up in, this is where I was performing, I didn't know where to go next. And I reached out who has become my family, like he's my brother, he's one of my closest friends, DDM. I reached out to him. I was like, I don't know where to go next. He was like, you have to get into Station North art scene. And when I got into Station North, it was a bubble within a city because Baltimore, on the scope of things, you come here, you hear like Lil Scooter, Scola, Young Moose, like you hear a lot of these hood, like King Los, a lot of the mainstream sound are like the hood rappers. But if you're in Baltimore, in the city, everybody knows the art scene are like the kids who have the city on lock, which is kind of where my moniker, the Queen of the Underground, came from because we are a little bubble and we are not known largely, but we're like locally popular, we're locally famous. So I really just kind of stumbled into it and I was like, I have found my tribe. And being in the art scene, you connect with a lot of people who running the radio stations, they run nonprofits, they put on festivals. So making these connections, it really just allowed me to grow in a lot of avenues in Baltimore that when people are in the like hood scene of it, they don't get those opportunities until they've actually like made it and then they bring them back. So it's been like an interesting journey because we are very like the over underground. Like we're right there, but we're very still underground.
Yeah. I think that that speaks to the art scene in a lot of cities and especially unique in Baltimore because for me covering underground artists, you always hear that. Like I'm very well known and very well respected in my city, and I'm a curator of sound here.
Mm-hmm.
But the way the larger media tends to circle or gravitate towards the people that have larger followings on social media, or when you go to individuals that are not as plugged in with the arts community, you'll say, okay, who's the big rappers in your city right now? And they'll name those people.
Yeah.
But those people are influenced by the people of the underground. So like it's hard to trace back like credit, if you will, to like
Yeah.
who's really shaping the sounds in these different cities. I want to talk about the queer community because here in Newark, our club is called the Globe. We have the Globe Sundays. Baby, I ain't even going to embarrass myself in telling the stories of the Globe and me sneaking in being underage, but um with the Paradox, it was a safe home for you, and the Globe was a safe home for me. Now, looking back on now, years later and decades later, to see how queer creators, queer musicians, and queer culture is replicated onto mainstream platforms, I've had conversations with queer people, and they are hesitant about it. and reluctant for this kind of mainstream notoriety for several different reasons. One of which, as I said, like the credit not being given back to those artists and the same opportunities and financial endeavors not being granted. But we do have shows like RuPaul's Drag Race, and we have shows like Legendary on I think it's HBO, if I'm not mistaken. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that highlight these creators in these underground spaces that are often marginalized. So do you have any thoughts on it, or like do you have a take on how queer culture has now been portrayed in mainstream media?
I do. It is one of those topics where I start talking and I don't shut up about. I think a lot of times, this is interesting because not connected but connected. I love true crime, so I was literally just watching like the short John Wayne Gacy series that they have on Netflix. And it was interesting because when I was listening to them talk about like homosexuality in like the 60s and 70s, it really it reminded me that there has never been any nuance for queer culture, especially not Black queer culture. So I have like, I don't know, I feel weird about it because I love that shows like Legendary and Pose are like highlighting there's so much nuance and intersectionality within like Black queer communities. But at the same time, I don't think people always get it, because I still have people who ask me, oh, because like I wear makeup and I say like I have a show. They're like, but are you a drag queen? Like I don't get it. Like how can you be queer and do like music? So it's interesting because artistically, I'm so happy that people can see that we have nuance and that we are more than, and there are many intersections within our identity. But you also give it to the masses who don't do the work to look at that. So I am thankful. And I think I see that a lot now. When I was having a conversation a lot when Little Nas X was coming up and everybody was like, it's about time we have a queer rapper. But like, if you listen to Nas's music, I don't feel like he's a rapper. Like, I feel like he's a pop star. And the other day when I found out that Saucy Santana got signed to RCA, I was like, I think this, as much as I love and respect Little Nas X, I think this is going to push the needle a little bit more, because you have a Black queer person who is like kind of an around the way girl. Like there's a little bit more nuance and intersectionality there, and it's like, oh, so Little Nas X is different than Saucy Santana, who's different than RuPaul, who's different than Billy Porter, who is different than like queer women who are in this, who are different than trans people. So I'm excited that we're still growing. But I think that the outside world has a lot more like education for themselves to do. But I think we're getting to a point where we're giving them so many different people to look at. It's being able to be built.
I wasn't going to mention that, but I think it's a great conversation to have. So, a few years back on the site, we did an article about, is hip hop ready to accept openly queer artists? And that was like at the rise of like Saucy Santana, after like Walk 'Em Like a Dog came out,
Mhm.
and he had already gone on to make other singles. And the writer, Alex Gonzalez, who's an amazing writer, when we were having a conversation, he was saying like, I can't on my one hand name openly gay rappers or openly queer rappers that are covered. Like the question was, are they covered by mainstream media? Right?
Mhm.
Not do they have a fan following, not are they accepted and loved, not are they talented, but does the mainstream place an importance on covering and documenting their journey? And when we were thinking about it at the time, the quick reference was always, oh, Young M.A. And when Young M.A. came out in an interview with Hollywood Unlocked and Jason Lee and said, he was like, oh, Jason Lee asked Young M.A. was like, oh, how do you feel like being listed with the female rappers? And Young M.A. went to respond. And in her response, they didn't directly say it, but their response hinted at, I am non-binary. Like,
Mhm.
people put me in the female list, and I understand why, because they've been preconditioned to see my physicality and say, oh, this is a woman rapper. And then now, fast forward later, Saucy Santana is constantly telling people, like, my pronouns are he, him. I am visibly dressed how I want to dress. You see me and you think that I'm trans or I want to be or present as woman. I'm presenting fluidity. That's what I'm doing. So I think that's an amazing conversation to have about, like, okay, people in society are now unlearning a lot of things. But when it still comes to hip hop, there tends to still be a disconnect. So I would pose a question to you. Do you feel like hip hop is ready and willing to accept gender bending, fluid, queer, non-conformist artists as a whole?
Had we would have had this conversation a month ago, I would have said, I'm not sure. And this might be me being too like optimistic about it. But I think the most beautiful thing that I've seen in the last couple of months, like when it comes to the conversation of queerness and hip hop, is Isaiah Rashad's Coachella opening. And so many different cuts. And what I specifically remember was the cut from The Game and him saying, I don't care who he is. Like, if he can rap, he can rap. And I remember old interviews of him, like with Vlad, talking about things where he was kind of like, you know, if people do it, they do it, but like, I don't want to see the shit. And then it's like, oh, again, more nuance of everybody thinking that the queer person is the either flaming sidekick that Will and Grace and sitcoms and things have created, or they're like the really butch lesbian like Ellen. And it's like there's never been anything different. So now they're like, okay, you do have again like all these people, Young M.A, like Lady Luck, you have Santana just in hip hop, Isaiah
Pineapple
Rashad,
City,
Little
Dua
Nas X.
Sailor. Like, I
Yes.
could go down a list of people, and it's just so weird to me that in this big year of 2022, that it was a necessary moment for Isaiah Rashad to
Right.
have that. And it was also refreshing to me, and I'm sorry that I cut you off. It was
No, you're
refreshing
fine.
to me to see how quickly fans and other musicians rallied around him
Yeah.
in that moment, because outing is a disgusting practice. I say
It
it all
is.
the time. Um
It's
and
dangerous.
it's very dangerous because it immediately inflicts harm, whether it's mental
Mm-hmm.
harm or possibly physical harm on the person that's being outed, and or their partners. But it doesn't allow the person being outed the opportunity to express it when they want to. We don't require musicians to come out and say, I am heterosexual.
Right.
That's not a requirement. So to see that Isaiah Rashad even indirectly addressing what happened was, and to see the positive response from it was heartwarming.
I agree, 1000%. So I think we're getting there. It definitely takes it's taken little steps, and it's definitely still very like cringe-worthy moments. Because even in watching everything with Santana, I just saw he had an interview with the Breakfast Club, and he brought somebody in from the radio station who was a straight male who had made the comment that he enjoys watching Santana's like twerk videos. And you could tell like in the moment, like Santana was kind of uncomfortable, and he like looked at Charlamagne and was like, you're like, you playing right now, like, because you're bringing this man in to try to insinuate like, oh, he's not straight because he watches your twerk videos. And when you do things like that, like it does in it, that could have been a moment where had this been a person who wasn't secure in themselves, it could have incited violence. Or even though he is secure in himself, it opens it up to the internet to make their comments. So I definitely think that we have a long way to go, but I definitely think there's more people who are willing to educate themselves and receive education to get to where we need to be. So that's also nice to see, knowing like where I've come from and what I've been through, especially with the industry. So it's like it kind of ignited another fire in me, because it's like, all right, we might still have a chance at this.
I love that because it's so easy to feel the pressures from outside to say, you know what, it's never going to be open, it's never going to be accepting. But we see so much so now that people are making their own communities, and I'm glad to see it. Just because it it just I don't know, it just makes me hot thinking about, hot in a furious way, not like hot like sexy. For clarity, to see that so many people are constantly dismissed, and then we have the conversation of like, oh, can we just separate the art from the artist? And it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
we can do that for pedophiles, for rapists, for women beaters. We can do this for misogynists. We can do that for everybody else, but we can't do that for queer people. Got
Oh,
it. Understood.
right.
So that leads us to your song Pink Durag. So Pink Durag, and first of all, banger. That's first
Thank
and
you.
foremost. But there was one line in the song in particular that caught my ear, and it's still on this conversation that we're having. And you said, if you don't want equality for everyone, you just seek privilege. So what makes you any different than the white people that are oppressing us? So can you talk about the inspiration behind the track and how that song came to be?
Um, it's so crazy the response that Pink Durag had, especially like in my city in the scene, because I almost didn't release it. The reason I did release it was because of Bandcamp Friday. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna record this song. And the beginning of the song was done, but the spoken word part at the end I didn't have yet. And I like recorded a demo in my closet and I was riding around and I was listening to it. And I was like, the song just, it's missing something. And I was like, I don't know what it is, but it's missing something. And I was at a stoplight and I remember opening Twitter and it was a thread about the difference in response to violence when it comes to Black people when it's men versus women or cis men versus queer people, and specifically comparing Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And it just struck something in me, and I literally opened the notepad and never had something flowed so quickly as that spoken word part at the end. And it really just, I don't know, I feel like a lot of times people who are in my city specifically have respect for me that they don't have for other queer people, which is a conversation within itself. But I definitely feel like I need to take the opportunities when they're going to listen and when I can educate them and I have the capacity to educate them to do so. So I always feel like that song is important because that spoken word piece I feel is needed. Like people need to hear that, because sometimes when it's something on Twitter or on the news, or it's like you're feeling pressure, people don't always open up their minds to it. But that song to me is very much like a let me spark a blunt, let me chill in my car, let me turn some music on, and then that hits you. And the fact that it's a cappella, it's like, oh shit. And a friend of mine actually was like, yeah, I had to send this to my brother because we were just having a conversation of like religion and gender and identity. And he just said like that opened the conversation and helped him try to open his brother's eyes. So I like to use moments like that, but at the end of the day, I just love to use my platform and use my voice. Like I feel like it's needed. Sometimes it's a little preachy, but I'm like, y'all gonna get a bop and a word. Like I felt the need to say it at the time, and I'm happy that it was able to flow through me the way that it did.
And I'm glad you said it because it's authentic voice. And it's said in a way that I feel most people can understand it. Most
Mm-hmm.
times the thing about when listeners or fans say, "Oh, it's too preachy," is because it's so theologically based, or it's so like academically worded, or it's so scholarly that it's hard to understand what exactly the person is trying to say unless you're like well read, well researched. But it was said in a way like, no, me to you, you to me, this is a conversation that we're having. Like, so you
Thank
understand.
you. I'm so glad that you said that, because one of the things I pride myself on, I always say that I'm a translator, um, because I didn't do very well in school. Like I just was not very strong academically. And luckily I worked at a college where I was able to take classes for free. And I majored in sociology before I dropped out and I left. I majored in sociology, and I pride myself on being able to listen in into conversations and be in rooms that at one point in time in my life, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be in, and being able to regurgitate that in a way that everybody can explain. And I actually was just recently on a panel for an exhibit on hip hop that is going to be going into art museums and around the country. And I ended up in a discussion with one of the other people on the board who happened to be like a cis man, when I said, I think we should be more inclusive with the language that we're using when we are describing this exhibit and these pieces in the exhibit, because when you think of hip hop, think of youth, think of the future, think of inclusivity, and how you're wording things is, I want a very specific demographic who enjoys hip hop to enjoy this. And they didn't quite agree, and they kind of thought that I was like, oh, dumb it down because we're Black. And I was like, yeah, no, you're taking something and trying to carry it in a completely different way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we talk about all these different ways to be inclusive, but a lot of times people use language and they weaponize it, and they use it in a way that only certain people can understand. And that's why a lot of times with social justice issues and things that go on, people tap out because they can't relate, and they don't want to feel inferior by being asked to explain. So that was one of those moments where I wanted to say, like, I could have been there. There's an injustice between the comparison of how men and women are treated when it comes. Don't nobody want to hear that shit. They want me to say, oh, okay, well, make sure that when the shit pop off, you ready for the backlash because you're not really a part of the movement. Like that's how people want to hear it. They want the realness of it.
So outside of being an advocate and activist and a rapper, you're also a DJ and a producer. So now let's go to the story of how I met you. So we were connected mutually by our good friend Unique, and Unique through an event for her organization PB&J, which is kind of like a coalition, I like to describe it as, between New Jersey dance producers, dance DJs, and engineers, and Baltimore producers, DJs, and engineers, and then Philadelphia DJs, engineers, and DJs. So we're sitting down, we're all like having fun, and we're watching a performance. And there's a choreographer and a dancer on stage doing the Wu-Tang. Now, for those people who are watching that are from Jersey or from Philly or from Baltimore, we all in that moment realize we all do the dance differently. So I'm in awe. I'm just like, what is this? This ain't the Wu-Tang. Like, and I look over at you and you feeling the same way I'm feeling. And I'm just like, where you from? And you're like, I'm from Baltimore. And I'm like, I'm from Jersey. And that's not how we do it. And then you're like, that's not how we do it either. So I'm like, I'm gonna show you how we do it here. And you
right.
We kind of like connected from dance music and club music in particular. So talk to me about how you fell in love with DJing and why dance music.
Oh, I love K-Swift. I am, rest in peace. I am a very introverted extrovert. So as a kid, I had a lot of friends at school, but I didn't spend a lot of time with friends outside of school once I hit like towards the end of middle school. And if I did, it was like one or two friends. So I used to spend a lot of Friday nights just like in the house, in my room, with the radio, with the antenna, with the tinfoil on the end, trying to get some reception to listen to the radio. And on Friday nights, I remember listening to K-Swift DJing, and it did not matter what she played. There was going to be club music in there. There was going to be Baltimore remixes of popular songs. There was going to be club flips. Like, I just lived for that moment. And it just made me fall in love with DJing. And when you're a kid, you're not crazy enough to believe that you can't do things. So I literally, one year for Christmas, I just asked my parents, I was like, can I have a controller? I don't want anything else. I know it's expensive. Literally, don't buy me anything else. And you don't have to give me anything for my birthday if you just get me a controller. And they got me a controller, and I just taught myself how to DJ. There was no YouTube to go and reference. There was no social media as big as it is. I would literally just sit in my room and teach myself how to DJ. And then I watched other DJs and I listened to other DJs, and I would be like, how do you do that? And I just kept practicing. And I was never, like I said, I was never good academically. I was never into sports. So music was always the one thing that I was good at. And when I figured out that I could constantly improve and get better with DJing, I really went hard with it. And then I stopped when I moved to Baltimore because I was like, I don't, and when I say I was DJing, I DJed 2 or 3 of my high school teachers' weddings. I DJed my senior prom. I DJed all the 8th grade dances, people's sweet 16s. Like I really had a
Working girl,
little
a
mobile,
working
yes,
girl,
I
okay?
was a mobile DJ. I had a business before I was like 19 years old. And then I stopped because I was like, all right, when I move to Baltimore, I want to focus on my music. And if everybody finds out that I rap and they like my music, then I'll start DJing again. And I also just hated doing parties where everybody just wanted to hear top 40 music. So then again, when I got into um, Station North in the art scene, I realized that people threw whole parties with just dance music and house music and club music. And I was like, okay, I have to start DJing again. And then once I got into it, I fell in love with it even more than I did before. Knowing that, oh, there's so many more producers now, dance music is so much more expensive. It just made me fall in love with it so much more. And when the pandemic hit, I'm very much an energy person. So I have to be in the crowd, like with people, it connects me. So when people are asking me to do in-house performances, I was like, well, no, but I can do a DJ set. So then I just really started DJing during the pandemic. And to me, always thinking business minded, I was like, okay, in the meantime of me not putting out music, I can still be in the forefront and remain in people's vision with music without it having to be my music. So I really fell in love with DJing more now than I ever have been. And every time I go to DJ, I like to challenge myself a little bit more. And I'm like, yeah, this is great. Cause sometimes performing, like I love performing, but when you have like 6 shows, 6 weeks straight, it's like, okay, sometimes I gotta recycle a set here and there. With DJing, it's like, okay, I have so many options. I could do something different every time. So it just kind of like, it keeps my passion alive.
I think DJing is a lost art form. Like,
I agree.
and again, it's because I know people are gonna say it's because of the people who attend the parties and radio needs and streaming numbers and all that stuff. But I think DJing is an unappreciated, unmastered art form in today's space. Now, in mainstream music, yes, but DJing is alive, well, and thriving in dance music. And I think that goes to talk about like Black culture and Black music. Now, a few years ago now, I think at this point, I think 2020, the first Black person won a Grammy for dance music.
Music, yeah.
And the conversation started, it was K Tronada. The conversation started like, why has it taken this long for a Black person to win in the dance category? Because inherently dance music is Black music,
Yes.
right? And now fast forward to now, we have 2 all Black queer lineups for festivals in dance music, one of which is the Dweller Fest in New York, and then we have the one coming up in for Memorial Day weekend with Aluna, with Nora Fever in New Orleans. So I would love to hear your take on that. Like, have you come across anything in the dance music space that has made you raise an eyebrow that you want to share publicly?
Yes. The crazy thing is coming into Baltimore in the scene, it was very white driven. It was very white driven. It was very indie band. It was very like kind of like pop punk driven in this scene. And then these bands that were really popular started branching off and they started leaving the city. And then everybody was like, well, what do we do? And it was Black queer people who rebuilt party culture in our city. So it was very interesting, especially dealing with DJ gigs when I first moved here with white promoters and them trying to tell us like nobody's going to come out for this. And in my head, I'm like, do you know what you're talking about? Like, you don't think that anybody's going to come out to a club house party? Like, so when we started booking these venues, we finally convinced people like, just give us a chance. And I just saw a lot of like racism and like people weaponizing the genre and being like, oh, well, this causes a little bit of chaos. You know, we don't typically want this. I saw that a lot, or this is a city where Diplo used to come through and sit in these clubs and steal sounds from people and then go and take them to mainstream. And then when people made comments about it, they would be like, Diplo don't know who y'all are in Baltimore while he got pictures in Sonar and his name on flyers. Like it was things like that because people would take things and run with it. The LMFAO sound that was big in 2010, that was Baltimore club music. To a point to where Usher OMG had a whole Baltimore club remix. Like we've always been very prevalent, but because of people's skin color and who we are and where we come from, it's blocked. I even remember, I think it was either Slink or Swizzy Mac. I feel like it was Slink. Slink and another producer like teamed up and basically said that there was a white girl from Ukraine or some shit, and they made club music and they sent it to a label that wouldn't play their music, and they made a whole feature about them because they thought it was just a
Yes.
little white girl in her bedroom. And that was just like a great example to go to show. Or even when you think about Unique and how much Unique has done for like Black rave music and Black dance music, and people still try to keep her off of bills. We definitely still have those issues, but now we have more resources. And with the internet, we have a connection to build with each other. So I'm so excited to see these things continuously happen because I think we've really gotten to a point where we're like, either y'all gonna give it to us or we're gonna take it. So we trying to give you an opportunity to get a little coin, or we can keep it to ourselves. Either way is cool. Like just let us know how we're moving.
I think I love that because coming from Jersey and experience it for in firsthand, seeing like how literally we would pack out little like community centers for parties, and then it quickly elevated into like big venues here in the state. And then even festivals would have like a full day dedicated to like Jersey house and Jersey club music. And I always tell people this conversation is just like, you're forgetting that Black dance music has always been pioneered and duplicated with the name ripped off and another artist attached. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just so happens that in the past you couldn't catch it as easily, but
Right.
now with the internet, I always say like think about like Sierra's Level Up. Is that not club music?
That's straight
I think
Jersey
about
Club.
I'm just and then it's like Division, Keep It Going on the album Amusing Her Feelings, club music. And even the producer of the album said, well, when I went to sample sounds and I went to think about how to construct the flow of it, I went to Baltimore Club, I went to Philly Club, I went to Jersey Club to see how the DJs were doing it. And then it's other people, even now with Chloe Bailey and her single, she sampled TT the Artist and Unique. And I'm just like, we've always been there. We've always
Always.
created the movement. We always had the sound. We always had the ears. It just we never received that the awards and the accreditation for it. So I think it's an interesting conversation to have, and I really do look forward to seeing what happens in the dance space moving forward. And I'm excited to see what you do next. I know that dance music is a big part of your repertoire. I've had the fortune to see you live and to hear unreleased music, but talk to me about like what can fans expect from the album coming up? What are the sonic influences that you're going for? Like what is the vibe? Like what are we going to be getting?
Um, so first of all, shout out to TT the artist because TT is the first person who put me on a show when I came into the Station North scene. And it is because of her in DDM I've been able to get to where I am. So I love TT. People I think who listen to me regularly have come to know that they should not have any expectations because I will put out a club project and then you will hear something like Pink Durag or you'll hear something like Growing Pains and it's like, wait, I really still like this, but this isn't what I expected. So with the album, initially when I started on the album, I was like, this was my Jay-Z the Black album. I was like, this is gonna be my last project. So I wanna do everything. I want a piece of everywhere that I've been musically. So you're gonna hear club music on here, a little bit of club influence. You're definitely gonna hear some more upbeat, dancier influence, that more chill vibe, a little bit more kind of like top 40, okay, we here for the hook type thing, but you're definitely still gonna hear that like conscious or like hey, this shit is still happening records. And I'm so excited that it's coming out, but also at this point, it's a year and some change old. So I just feel like I've advanced a lot from even making that album, but I'm excited to share it because there's so many influences that have brought me up. There's a little like ode to go-go on there, ode to dance music. I'm just excited for people to hear it because it's a little taste. If you have never heard of me before, this I think is the perfect project to get a full scope of who I am as an artist.
So how many tracks can we expect? I know that you haven't formally released of when this is gonna drop, like the actual release date. And you haven't dropped any track lists yet. So like it's really gonna be like up in the air on like whether you're gonna have features, how many songs is it gonna be? We don't know what the title is gonna be. So let's start there. How many songs are working its way to make the final edit?
Oh my God, there's been so many iterations. I think it's 12 now. I think it's 12 tracks.
So we're gonna get a full LP.
You're gonna get a full LP, which also was an ode to like where I have come from, because I know like EPs have taken over, but I'm like, I remember getting Diddy's Press Play, and you opened it and then you could open, it was like a extended, I wanted a full experience. So this definitely is not an EP, you're getting a full LP. There is one rap feature on there, which I'm super excited about because he is one of my favorites coming up in Baltimore City. He is just like, on that verse, it very much reminds me of a young like Lupe Fiasco. And he also is just, oh, he's so crazy talented, and I love him so much. So there's only one rap feature, and I did that on purpose. And I'm excited. I'm excited for people to hear what is to come. And the fact that people haven't gotten to hear too much is like stressful on my end, but I also think it's going to be like a pleasant surprise for listeners.
So when can we expect the project? No spring, summer jogger charade moment. Like, do you have a range of when the project is supposed to drop?
So we are definitely not pulling a Beyonce, but my team wants to kind of keep the date a secret. But I definitely will say we will not enter the beginning of July without my album. I will say that much.
So if it's my birthday is July 5th. So if July 5th come and we ain't got an album, you gonna, instead of answering all of the birthday messages, I'm just gonna hit you like, excuse me, we on borrowed time now. Like what's the project?
You will have multiple singles by that time. I can say that much.
I'm excited to hear that. And I know that you're such an artist that plays shows, the sets so often, and navigating this new world with COVID and live performances is scary because that's a really big part of making money as an independent artist. But what are your plans coming up for the next few months or so? I know you're still finalizing the project, but are there going to be any more DJ sets, any more performances? Like, what can we expect?
DJing she gonna go on a little vacation for right now. I actually have a show tonight. I'm leaving straight from this interview and going to sound check. All of May, all of June right now is completely booked. Hopefully we will have a tour solidified, just like a small, maybe East Coast tour solidified before the end of the year. But my DC babies, they're going to get to see me multiple times this year. I'm looking to make my way back to Philly and Jersey, but we do have a lot of shows coming up between May and July. And I'm super, super excited. I'm working on some programming with the Kennedy Center in DC. So that's going to be really big. And I'm actually really excited for that. So I'm excited to see where this grows. Even the project, I'm releasing a project with the label Babe City, who released my first EP with them, Diary of a Dreamer. Even the way that we've gone about marketing and everything and the people that they've pulled into the team, like it's a lot bigger than it was the time before. So it even makes me more excited when people are putting more into the project. It makes me believe that they believe in the music more. So I'm excited to see how this continues to grow because I'm ready to be on festival stages everywhere. Like it's time.
I don't doubt that that's in your near future. I don't doubt that at all, by any stretch of the imagination.
Thank you.
So how can fans and supporters get in contact with you, stay up to date with things, with the releases, and how can they support you overall?
The best way, if you want to be entertained, follow me on Twitter because, you know, I'm funny. If you want some life lessons in my preachy moments of being more human, follow me on TikTok. And if you want all the glitz and glam of the music, follow me on Instagram. The website is coming soon, a nice little revamp of the website. So you can join like my mailing list and everything from there. But really just keeping your eye on everything that I do, turning on post notifications because you never know when you might get some information. But I definitely am going to say it's going to be an amazing summer. And I think once the album does drop, it's going to do some things. And I'm excited for that because I'm ready to take this music around.
And we're ready to receive it, babe. We're ready to receive it. So another way you can support everyone is if you are participating in a Bandcamp Friday. Kotic Couture does have singles, past mixes, and actual single music available for purchase there as well. So thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with me. I really am looking forward to the project, honestly and truly.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm excited and I can't wait for us to meet again when I have even more accomplishments to talk about.
You're gonna have to come back when the project drops because the way you hinting at it and giving us little breadcrumbs, I'm gonna have to come back and circle back like, all right, on track 2, when you said this.
Let's do it.
So y'all heard it here. So when the project drops, we're gonna have Kotic Couture back.
We coming back.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.